Hey guys, tonight we drift through candlelight and frost into a palace where silence can kill faster than poison. You can smell the wax melting, the perfume masking fear, the faint creak of shoes across marble floors polished by generations of servants too afraid to speak. You're in the 18th century, in a world where the wrong whisper can end your bloodline and the right smile can make you immortal. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And while you're at it, tell me in the comments, where are you listening from and what time is it right now? Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You're born Sophie of Anhalt-Zerbst, a name that sounds like it belongs to a secondary character in someone else's fairy tale. You're German, minor nobility, the kind of person Europe produces in bulk, destined to marry strategically, live politely, and die quietly. But you are not a quiet girl. Your tutors complain you read too much. You devour Voltaire and Plutarch before you're 12. Memorizing the rise and fall of kings as if studying an instruction manual. When your mother walks into your room, you practice your curtsy before the mirror, but you're not admiring your grace. You're studying your armor. Historians still argue whether your ambition was born of desperation or destiny. Maybe both. You grow up in a house where love is a currency you never quite afford. Your father is kind but irrelevant. Your mother calculating and cold. You learn early that affection is just another form of negotiation. Then one day, a letter arrives from the Russian court. The Empress of Russia, Elizabeth, has a nephew, Peter of Holstein-Gottorp. He's technically next in line for the throne, though no one seems enthusiastic about it. The boy is odd, immature, obsessed with toy soldiers and Prussian uniforms. Elizabeth, childless and pragmatic, needs a bride for him, a foreign princess, pliable enough to shape, but noble enough to look legitimate. Your mother nearly faints from excitement. You, however, sense something else. Opportunity disguised as exile. You're 14 when you first travel to Russia. The journey is long, freezing, and full of superstition. Peasants cross themselves as your carriage passes. You count milestones and memorize the rhythm of the wheels, as if trying to calculate how far ambition can travel before it collapses. When you arrive in St. Petersburg, the city feels like a dream carved out of ice. The palaces glitter, but the air tastes of iron and dampness. The Empress greets you, plump, regal, her face powdered like marble, and you realize she's testing you before you've even spoken. You bow so low your knees ache, but you smile with perfect control. She studies you, nods, and says, "You will make a fine Russian." What she means is, you will make a fine pawn. Your baptism into orthodoxy is public theater. You stand before priests in gilded robes as incense coils, like smoke from a burning future. You take a new name, Catherine. The crowd applauds. The girl, Sophie, ceases to exist. That night, lying in your new bed, you whisper your new name aloud just to taste its power. Catherine. It feels sharper, heavier like a crown made of glass. You promise yourself you'll learn every word of the Russian language, every rule of its labyrinthine court, every mood of its empress. You don't intend to be a pawn forever. Your fiancé, Peter, is a disappointment wrapped in royal velvet. He's pale, fidgety, fond of drink, and prone to tantrums. He adores Frederick the Great of Prussia, an enemy of Russia, and collects miniature soldiers with the obsession of a child who never grew up. You study him quietly, the way a scientist studies a flawed experiment. You smile, you flatter, and you begin to learn the art of survival. How to pretend adoration while plotting evolution. Court life is an opera without intermission. You never know whether the laughter behind a fan hides gossip or a dagger. servants eavesdrop, ministers betray, and the Empress herself plays favorites, like a conductor choosing which instruments to silence. You learn quickly that power here doesn't shout, it whispers. So you whisper back. You befriend the right ladies in waiting. You dance with the right genders. You let people underestimate you. It's the safest disguise. Every night, you write secret notes in the margins of your prayer book. Reminders, alliances, observations. One reads, "He who depends on others for his crown will lose both." You're 17 when you realize you could rule Russia better than anyone in the palace, but saying it aloud would be suicide. So you learn patience. You let Peter humiliate you in public. Let courtiers gossip about your barren marriage. You keep your smile fixed and your eyes open. You read Montesquieu and Machiavelli under candlelight, the words flickering across your face like prophecies. And somewhere deep inside, the girl who used to curtsy in front of mirrors starts rehearsing a different gesture, the subtle tilt of the head that comes not from obedience, but command. There's a story, maybe apocryphal, that one winter, you fell ill with pneumonia, nearly dying from the Russian cold. The doctors gave up. The priests prepared the rites, but you refused to die. You ordered all the windows closed, wrapped yourself in furs, and demanded lemon water instead of holy water. When you finally recovered, you told your maid, "I will never die until I have ruled." Historians debate whether you actually said it, but if you didn't, you should have. Because from that moment forward, it was true. Outside, the Russian night stretches forever black, endless, and cold. But in your room, a small candle still burns beside your bed. You stare into the flame and think, maybe I was born in the wrong country, or maybe I was born to change it. And as the wind howls against the palace windows, somewhere deep in your heart, the first spark of empire catches light. A marriage of ice and iron. You arrive in Russia and wed a strange prince whose heart is colder than the palace walls. You wake up one morning to find that your life has been decided for you, sealed in ink and stamped with imperial wax. You're to marry Peter, Grand Duke of Russia, the same boy who once tripped over his own sword during a ceremony. The same boy whose eyes light up only when he's talking about toy soldiers or his idol, Frederick the Great. The engagement feels less like a union and more like a political experiment. Take one German girl, add one unstable heir. Shake thoroughly and pray the empire doesn't explode. Your mother celebrates like she's just conquered Europe. But you, standing before a mirror in your wedding gown, feels something different. The fabric is heavy, suffocating as if the empire itself has decided to test your endurance. You whisper, "So this is what destiny feels like." The wedding is a spectacle, of course. Gilded icons, choirs echoing beneath vaulted ceilings, the air thick with incense and tension. You're 18, trembling slightly as the crown is lowered onto your head. Peter looks bored, yawning between hymns. He smells faintly of brandy and indifference. When the priest announces you husband and wife, you steal a glance at the Empress Elizabeth. Her eyes are sharp, glinting with a satisfaction that feels less like love and more like ownership. You understand the message perfectly. You belong to Russia now. The marriage, as it turns out, is a battlefield without honor. Peter spends his nights drinking, playing with wooden soldiers, or worshiping portraits of Frederick the Great. You spend yours learning Russian, studying court etiquette, and trying not to die of loneliness. Historians still argue whether your union was ever consummated, or whether Peter was simply incapable of intimacy. What is certain is that you lived like strangers under the same gilded roof. He mocked you publicly, called you names, even locked himself in another room to play war games, while you entertained foreign ambassadors alone. But here's the strange thing about isolation. It clarifies ambition. You begin to adapt, the way plants grow toward light, no matter how narrow the window. You attend court balls, smile when expected, and never miss an opportunity to listen. The Empress notices your composure, your language skills, your diplomacy. Russia notices you not as a bride, but as a presence. You also notice something else. The people love you. Not for who you are, but for what you represent: youth, intellect, and the faint hope that maybe, just maybe, the next ruler won't be mad. You write secretly to your family, but the letters grow shorter with each passing month. There's nothing left to say except what you cannot. I'm trapped inside a snow globe, and the snow never stops falling. Then, in one of history's strangest love triangles, fate throws you a curve. The Empress, Elizabeth, your aunt-in-law, your mentor, your warden, begins to grow ill. Peter, meanwhile, grows more erratic. He parades his mistress openly, dresses like a Prussian officer, and mocks the Orthodox Church. You begin to realize that if he becomes emperor, Russia will tear itself apart. And somewhere in that realization, a dangerous thought blooms. What if I could do it better? You're still only in your 20s, yet the idea doesn't frighten you. It thrills you. You start cultivating relationships, generals, ministers, even foreign diplomats, anyone who might prove useful one day. You learn how to flatter without lying, how to command without appearing to. You also fall in love, or something resembling it. Count Sergei Saltykov, charming, clever, and dangerously sympathetic, becomes your first affair. Historians debate whether he was also the biological father of your son, Paul. The official record says Peter was the father, but no one really believes it. Even so, the affair gives you something you hadn't felt in years: the illusion of control. The sense that you can rewrite your story, even if only in secret. When your son is born in 1754, the Empress takes him away immediately. She insists the future heir must be raised under her supervision. You're not even allowed to hold him. You smile politely in public, but inside, something breaks. The woman who once vowed to adapt now begins to plan. You write in your journal, "I am no longer content to survive. I must rule." And so, beneath the glittering chandeliers of the Russian court, you start assembling your invisible army, one favor, one alliance, one secret at a time. You learn that loyalty can be purchased with flattery, fear, or silk. You learn to listen when people think you're not paying attention. You learn that most men are desperate to be seen as indispensable, and that a well-timed smile can be sharper than any blade. Peter notices none of this. He's too busy holding mock military parades in his room, dressing his dogs in uniforms, and forcing courtiers to watch. He laughs as he makes them salute the animals. You watch silently, committing every detail to memory, because one day, you'll need those details. At night, when everyone else sleeps, you walk through the palace corridors alone. The walls are cold enough to sting your fingers. You pause beneath a portrait of Peter the Great, the man who dragged Russia into modernity, who built cities out of swamps and dared the world to call him barbarian. You whisper to the painting, "You were a tyrant, but at least you were awake." Outside, snow falls like powdered glass. Inside, you sit by the window, your reflection ghosted in frost, and think about the irony. You married into the mightiest empire on earth, and yet you've never felt smaller. Still, you make a quiet promise, not to fate, not to God, but to yourself. You will outlive everyone who underestimates you. You will survive this marriage, this court, this cage of gold. Because someday, the empire will need saving. And when that day comes, you'll be ready. Whispers behind velvet curtains court intrigue becomes your daily meal. Allies are made with glances, enemies with silence. You learn quickly that in the Russian court, every smile has an agenda, and every silence hides a knife. The palace isn't just a home, it's an ecosystem of ambition, perfume, and paranoia. Every chandelier seems to tremble with secrets. You start to move through it like a ghost in silk. You walk slower, speak softer, laugh only when it's safe. Servants begin to whisper that you can hear conversations through walls, and perhaps you can, because somehow you always know more than you should. You've discovered the art of listening without being noticed. Historians often describe you as cunning, but that word feels too neat, too small. You're not playing a game, you're surviving an empire that eats its own children. One evening, at a banquet, you watch Peter stand on a chair to perform one of his military demonstrations. He sloshes wine as he waves his toy sword, shouting in broken German about strategy, while courtiers clap through gritted teeth. You smile too, because not smiling would be fatal. Later that night, alone in your chambers, you laugh for the first time in months. Not because it's funny, but because it's absurd. The entire empire balanced on a fool's sword and your patience. You begin to write again, this time in coded notes that only you can decipher. Each page is a map of survival. Who's loyal, who's dangerous, who's pretending to be both. You realize that Russia isn't ruled from the throne. It's ruled in the shadows behind it. You befriend Grigory Orlov, a young officer with a quick smile and quicker temper. He's strong, politically shrewd, and most importantly, he listens. There's an instant chemistry, but it's more than attraction. It's recognition. You see in him what you need. Muscle to your mind, flame to your frost. Your friendship turns into alliance, and your alliance into something deeper. You confide in him things you've never dared. Say aloud your frustration with Peter, your vision for Russia, your hunger for freedom. Orlov doesn't flinch. He nods. And for the first time in years, you feel seen not as a pawn, but as a force. Historians debate whether Orlov truly loved you or simply loved your ambition. Maybe both. Maybe that's what makes it real. Then, a strange pattern begins to unfold. One by one, the men who mock you publicly start losing influence. One is dismissed, another falls ill, a third is reassigned to Siberia. You never lift a finger, or at least, no one sees you do it. Court gossip names you the Smiling Serpent. You take it as a compliment. Elizabeth, the Empress, grows weaker each day. Her face, once powdered perfection, now shows cracks like porcelain. She can barely stand during ceremonies. The courtiers hover around her like vultures with good manners. You visit her regularly, kneeling beside her bed, speaking softly. She grips your hand with surprising strength. "You are clever," she whispers once. "Too clever for your own good. Be careful when I'm gone." You bow your head, but you don't deny it, because by now, the palace already feels different. The corridors echo with rumors of succession, of betrayal, of what will happen when the old Empress dies. Peter, meanwhile, grows bolder in his stupidity. He dresses his dog in a miniature Prussian uniform and insists the animal be treated as an officer. He forces courtiers to drink toasts to the dog's health and laughs until he chokes. You don't laugh. You study the room instead. Some people laugh too loudly. Others don't laugh at all. You note their faces, the believers, the opportunists, the quiet ones whose eyes flick toward you when they think no one's watching. Because those eyes, those are the ones that matter. The day the Empress Elizabeth dies, the entire palace seems to exhale at once. Bells toll through the snow-heavy air. You stand by a window, your reflection trembling in the frost, and whisper, "It begins." Peter is now Emperor Peter III, and you are the Empress consort. The title tastes sweet but hollow, like fruit that's already begun to rot. He celebrates his coronation by lifting bans, changing policies, and insulting the Orthodox clergy. He worships everything Russian nobles despise. He orders military uniforms redesigned in Prussian style and makes Russia an ally to its own enemies. The court begins to turn against him slowly, invisibly, inevitably. And as it does, you find yourself at the center of a new storm. Ministers begin seeking your counsel in private. Generals linger too long after audiences. Foreign envoys ask for your opinion before your husband's. The empire, it seems, is beginning to look past the throne and at you. One night, as you and Orlov walk along the Neva River under a pale moon, he stops and says quietly, "They would follow you." You don't answer. The ice creaks beneath your boots. The city shivers in silence. He continues, "If you gave the word, they'd march tomorrow." You stare at the frozen water, imagining it breaking open, swallowing everything you know. "Not yet," you whisper. "He's still emperor." Orlov smiles faintly. For now, that night, you can't sleep. You lie awake, counting heartbeats, each one louder than the last. You think of Elizabeth's warning, "Be careful when I'm gone." And then you think of Peter, drunk in his chambers, laughing at his toy soldiers. You realize something monumental. Survival and power are no longer the same thing. And as the candle burns down beside your bed, the flame bends and twists, almost as if bowing to you. For the first time, you don't just imagine the crown, you begin to reach for it. The coup that changed the night. You steal a crown before dawn, riding through fog toward destiny and danger. It begins, as revolutions often do, with silence. The kind of silence that trembles under chandeliers, that hides behind heavy drapes and candle smoke. The kind that smells faintly of gunpowder and fear. Peter is emperor now, but already he rules like a man begging to be overthrown. His first decree alienates the army. His second insults the church. His third nearly destroys Russia's alliance with Austria. You sit at dinner beside him, smiling politely as he toasts Prussia, Russia's sworn enemy. You watch the general's jaws tighten. You don't say a word. But in that silence, the coup begins. The Orlov brothers, Grigory, Alexei, Ivan, become your quiet storm. They move like shadows through the capital, whispering to soldiers, promising gold and glory, muttering your name as if it's a spell. Catherine, the rightful ruler, the mother of the nation. You know the danger. Every step toward power is a step toward death if you fall. But you also know what's at stake, not just your crown, but Russia itself. Historians still argue whether you planned every detail or simply seized the moment when chaos opened its jaws. Maybe both. Greatness often looks like coincidence in hindsight. One July night in 1762, you wake before dawn. The city outside your window is drowned in fog, the kind that muffles even the sound of betrayal. You dress quickly, a simple black gown, a silver cross, a soldier's cloak draped over your shoulders. The candlelight dances across your face like prophecy. A knock at the door. Orlov enters, pale but burning with purpose. "It's time!" You nod, heart hammering, hands steady. You know that once you leave this room, there's no turning back. The carriage rattles through the sleeping city. The streets are ghostly, the air thick with anticipation. Somewhere, a church bell tolls one, then two, as if the night itself is counting your sins. You arrive at the Izmailovsky Regiment barracks. Hundreds of soldiers stand in formation, breath steaming in the cold dawn. You step down from the carriage, the hem of your gown brushing against the cobblestones. For a moment, they stare uncertain, waiting. Then you speak. "My brothers," you say softly, your voice trembling just enough to sound human. Russia has no ruler tonight, only a servant of Prussia wearing our crown. The words hang in the air. You lift the silver cross around your neck. If you love your faith, your country, your children, stand with me. Someone kneels, then another. Then the entire regiment drops to one knee, the sound of armor and devotion echoing like thunder. And just like that, you're no longer Catherine the Consort. You're Catherine the Commander. You ride at the head of the procession toward Street Petersburg. The city awakens to chaos, bells ringing, horses galloping, the roar of voices shouting your name. You look down at your gloved hands gripping the reins, thinking, so this is what destiny feels like, cold and fast. In the distance, the Peter and Paul fortress looms like a question mark. The loyal guards surrender before you reach the gates. The church blesses your coup before your husband even knows it's happened. You kneel before the altar as the archbishop anoints you with holy oil. The crowd outside chanting your name. Somewhere between fear and ecstasy, you realize something both terrifying and intoxicating. The Empire now bends toward your will. Meanwhile, Peter wakes in Oranienbaum Palace to the sound of footsteps and panic. His courtiers whisper of mutiny, of betrayal, of the Empress crowned in his stead. He laughs at first, a high, broken sound, until he sees his own guards deserting him. He tries to flee, tries to gather troops, but the roads are sealed, the messages intercepted. Every direction he turns, the Empire folds inward like a collapsing star. When he finally surrenders, you're calm. You sit in the Winter Palace, wearing your new uniform emerald velvet, lined with white fur, and wait for him to arrive. He's disheveled, trembling, his eyes red from drink and disbelief. For a moment, he looks less like an emperor and more like a boy who lost his toy soldiers. Why? He stammers. You tilt your head, voice low. Because someone had to. He signs his abdication. The ink glistens like blood. Days later, he's dead. Historians still argue about what happened next. Some say he was strangled in a drunken brawl with one of the Orlovs. Others say it was an accident. You, of course, never confess. You mourn publicly, weep convincingly, and declare your loyalty to God and Russia. But late at night, when you walk alone through the halls of the Winter Palace, the air feels heavier. The walls seem to breathe. You pause before a mirror. The reflection flickering in candlelight, a queen in black silk, a widow, a survivor, an empress. You whisper to your reflection, I am not sorry. The crown sits perfectly on your head, as if it had always been waiting for you. Outside, the storm breaks. Thunder rolls over the Neva like applause from the heavens, and as the lightning flashes across the sky, illuminating the city you now command, you realize something no book or tutor ever taught you. You didn't just steal the crown, you earned it. An empire awakens. From chaos, you forge order. Schools, hospitals, and ideas bloom like frost, flowers under your rule. Morning breaks over Street Petersburg, as if the sun itself is holding its breath. The coup has ended, the empire holds, and your name, Catherine II, Empress of all Russia, is whispered through frozen streets like a new kind of prayer. You stand at the palace balcony, wind tangling your hair, watching the city awaken beneath you. Cannon smoke still lingers from the night before, a gray veil drifting over domes and spires. For the first time in years, Russia feels still, the kind of stillness that comes after thunder, when the air hums with possibility. And there you are, 20-something, newly crowned, barely sleeping, holding together the largest empire on Earth, with nothing but charm, willpower, and an overworked quill. Historians still argue whether you ruled Russia with reason or with theater. Truth is, you ruled with both. You understood that power, like art, needed performance. So you staged your benevolence, as carefully as you staged your coups. You open hospitals where there were once dungeons. You commission schools for girls, a radical gesture in a land where most peasants still can't read. You summon architects from Italy, scientists from France, and artists from everywhere. They arrive bewildered, shivering, clutching letters sealed with your name. Russia, you tell them, must look like the future, not the past. Within months, palaces rise from mud, and libraries bloom beside cathedrals. You design entire cities on parchment and demand that builders obey your geometry. The country becomes your canvas, and you its painter with a crown instead of a brush. But progress, as you discover, is expensive not just in coin, but in contradiction. While nobles applaud your reforms over imported wine, peasants still till frozen fields for bread they'll never eat. You free a handful of serfs to prove a point, then quietly realize that freeing them all would collapse the economy. You write a nakaz, a manifesto on justice and equality inspired by Montesquieu and Beccaria, and send it to your legislative commission. They praise it, debate it, then do nothing. Because Russia, you learn, doesn't move with logic. It moves with inertia. You laugh at the irony. The Enlightenment has arrived in Russia wearing a fur coat. Still, you push on. You invite philosophers to write to you directly, and soon your desk overflows with letters from the brightest minds in Europe. Voltaire writes, calling you the Northern Star of Philosophy. Diderot sends you manuscripts and arguments in equal measure. You stay up late, reading their words by candlelight, ink staining your fingers, wax pooling like molten thought on your desk. Sometimes, you argue with them aloud softly, so the servants won't think you've gone mad. Yes, Voltaire, reason is lovely, but have you ever tried ruling Cossacks? Your courtiers don't understand why you correspond with these French radicals, but you know why. Their words remind you of the girl you used to be, Sophie of Anhalt-Zerbst, hungry for books, desperate for meaning. You've become what she dreamed of, powerful, feared, adored. Yet in the quiet between decrees, you still crave conversation that doesn't end with flattery. You begin collecting everything, art, coins, manuscripts, curiosities. You build what will one day be called the Hermitage. Though at first, it's just a few rooms filled with paintings you can't stop staring at. You walk among them at night, candle in hand, studying the faces of saints, queens, and martyrs. You understand. You whisper to them, don't you? That beauty is a kind of conquest, too. The guards think you're talking to ghosts. Perhaps you are. Not everyone celebrates your transformation of Russia. The old nobility grumbles that you act too French. The clergy mutters that you blaspheme by meddling with divine order. Foreign monarchs call you dangerous, which, to be fair, you are. You counter every criticism the same way, with progress. You flood the empire with printing presses, decree that smallpox inoculation is mandatory, after publicly getting one yourself, and send expeditions eastward that stretch the map until cartographers faint. One explorer returns frostbitten but exhilarated. We've found new lands beyond Siberia, he says. You nod. Good. Name one after me. Yet power has a way of isolating even its architects. You dine in gilded halls surrounded by mirrors, yet you rarely see your true reflection. The courtiers smile too much. The advisors agree too quickly. The world has become a play where you are both audience and actress. Sometimes, at night, you wander the palace corridors barefoot, feeling the chill of marble under your feet. You remember the foggy morning of your coup, the pounding heart, the certainty of purpose and wonder if you'll ever feel that alive again. You stop by a window. Outside, the city glows softly, candles twinkling like constellations. Somewhere below, A poor woman sings to her child in a language older than the empire itself. The sound slips through the glass, faint but pure. You close your eyes and listen. For a moment, you are not an empress. You are simply Catherine, a woman who stole a throne to give meaning to her own loneliness. And as the lullaby fades into the distance, you whisper the words you've never admitted aloud. I built this empire to save myself. The candle sputters. The wind rattles the window pane. The city sleeps. And in that fragile quiet, the empire you forged begins to dream with you. The philosopher's letters. You write to Voltaire by candlelight, trying to civilize a land that worships power over thought. It's late, the kind of late when even the palace clocks sound shy about marking the hour. Your desk is buried under scrolls, reports, half-finished decrees, and letters sealed in red wax. Most rulers would sleep. You don't. You're writing to a man who's never seen Russia, yet seems to understand it better than your own ministers. Voltaire, the philosopher who made kings nervous and ideas fashionable. You dip your quill in ink and begin. Mon cher et illustre ami, my dear and illustrious friend. The words glide from your hand like a confession disguised as politics. You tell him of the cold, of your projects, of your war against ignorance and mud. You flatter him a little, because you've learned that flattery, like vodka, keeps men talking longer than they should. He replies weeks later, his handwriting tight and alive. Madame, he says, your reign proves that genius and power are not always enemies. You smile when you read it, though you know it's a performance one genius recognizing another's need to be believed. Your correspondence with the great minds of Europe becomes both weapon and theater. Diderot sends you pages of encyclopedia, lamenting that men die ignorant while monarchs grow fat. You invite him to Russia, partly out of curiosity, partly because you enjoy testing philosophers against the smell of reality. When he arrives, he's overwhelmed. You are Europe's hope, he declares, staring at you as though you were an equation that disproves tyranny. You lead him through your halls of marble and gold, nodding politely. Then Europe should raise its standards. He stays for months, lecturing about freedom, reason, and the rights of man. You listen with the patience of someone who commands armies. Eventually, you pay him a generous pension and send him home safe, fed, and slightly confused. Historians still argue whether you were ever truly enlightened or whether you just played the role for applause. The truth is simpler. You loved ideas the way some people love dangerous animals beautiful from a distance, but never entirely tame. At court, your obsession with philosophy becomes gossip. Ministers whisper that you'd rather discuss Voltaire than the budget, that your heart beats to French sonnets instead of Russian hymns. You let them gossip. It distracts them from noticing how quietly you're changing the empire. You establish the Smolny Institute for Noble Maidens, the first state school for girls in Russia. You reform legal codes, modernize agriculture, and even flirt with ending torture, though your generals grumble that mercy isn't a Russian word. You start reading Montesquieu again, his words echoing in your head like a promise and a warning. Power should be a check to power. You underline it, then laugh softly. Except when it's mine. One night, as you read by candlelight, you catch your reflection in the window, half face, half flame. You remember the young Sophie, kneeling before priests, taking the name Catherine. She thought power would bring peace, but the more power you have, the more fragile it feels, like a palace made of glass. Beautiful only if no one breathes too hard. The philosophers adore you because you're their dream made flesh. A ruler who reads. But they don't understand that in Russia, thought is treason unless it wears a crown. So you wear it well. You host salons where noblewomen debate ethics beside generals who can't spell. You have portraits painted of yourself as Minerva, goddess of wisdom, calm amid chaos. You rewrite your own myth in real time. The people, of course, only see what you let them see. To them, you're not a woman of letters, but a miracle, the Empress who speaks softly, yet commands thunder. Voltaire's letters become your favorite insomnia cure. He teases you about your love of French culture, about your civilizing mission in the land of bears and blizzards. You write back dryly, "I have found the bears easier to manage." He sends you books, essays, and the occasional sketch of Parisian scandals. You send him furs, icons, and gossip about your own court. In a way, you become each other's mirror, each pretending the world is more rational than it truly is. When he dies in 1778, the news reaches you in spring. The lilacs are blooming in the palace gardens. You dismiss your attendants and sit alone by the window, reading his final letter again. The handwriting falters toward the end, like breath running out of body. He wrote, "You make reason sovereign where once ignorance ruled. Continue, and even time will obey you." You close the letter and whisper, "Even time has its limits, my friend." That night, you walk through the Hermitage, past statues of marble philosophers staring into eternity. The air smells faintly of oil and candle smoke. You pause before a bust of Voltaire, the one you had sculpted years ago, his stone eyes half amused, half skeptical. You touch the cheek of the statue and murmur, "You were right about everything except happiness." Because enlightenment, you've learned, is cold comfort, when the only voice that challenges you now comes from stone. Outside, the moon floats over the Neva like a silver coin tossed into the dark. Somewhere in the city, a printing press thunders, stamping your decrees into paper and history. The empire grows smarter, richer, stronger. But you grow quieter. You still read, you still write, you still believe in the power of thought. But sometimes, when the candles burn too low, and the ink on your fingers feels like blood, you wonder whether philosophy was ever meant for rulers, or only for those who dream of them. The lovers and the lies, each affair feeds your legend. Yet loneliness drinks deeper than passion ever could. They call you the great, but no one ever calls you loved. At least, not for long, because power is a strange bedfellow. It keeps you warm, but never close. And though your letters to philosophers sparkle with intellect, your nights in the Winter Palace echo with a kind of silence that could swallow empires. So you fill that silence the only way you can, with company. Historians like to count your lovers as though they were trophies. Grigory Orlov, Stanisław Poniatowski, Grigory Potemkin, and a parade of others whose names history has blurred into perfume and rumor. But each man was less a conquest than a mirror. In them, you saw the woman you might have been if you hadn't chosen the crown. It begins, of course, with Orlov, the man who helped you steal the throne. He is your sword, your shield, and, for a time, your solace. Together, you rebuild the state, share whispered jokes during council meetings, and finish each other's sentences like partners in both politics and passion. He's brave, broad-shouldered, utterly loyal, the kind of man who would burn a city for you if you asked. But love, you discover, has its own half-life. As the empire stabilizes, Orlov grows restless. His fame swells, his temper follows. He gambles, he strays. He forgets that your affection is not entitlement. When you finally end it, you do it with the same composure you used to sign peace treaties. He weeps, you don't. You thank him for his service to the empire and to your heart, and send him away with estates, titles, and silence. You cry later, alone, when the palace halls feel wider than they should. Then comes Stanisław Poniatowski, a Polish nobleman, romantic and idealistic. A man who looks at you not as an empress, but as a woman. You fall for him the way one falls into memory, gently, foolishly, knowing it cannot last. You install him as king of Poland, with your influence and armies, thinking it will make him yours forever. But power turns lovers into pawns, and soon Poland becomes less a kingdom than a lesson. Love and politics, you mutter one night, should never share a bed. Historians still argue whether you loved him or simply loved what his devotion reflected. The truth? You loved the version of yourself he saw, the dreamer, not the ruler. And dreams, as always, first. Then comes Potemkin. Ah, Potemkin, the thunder to your lightning. When you meet, you're both exhausted by pretense. He is clever, impulsive, brilliant in bursts, and unbearable in between. You argue about everything, philosophy, fashion, the fleet, and somehow, in the middle of the shouting, you fall in love. He writes to you like a general courting a goddess. Bold, unashamed, half mad. You write back with equal fire. Your letters could ignite paper. There's a story, one that may be true, or may be too perfect to disbelieve, that you two secretly married, a private union known only to a handful of witnesses. He calls you my Catherine. You call him my sword. You plan cities together, build ships, dream of empire, like two architects sketching eternity. But even love as volcanic as yours cannot defy distance. Potemkin leaves to govern the south, to build new lands in your name. You remain in St. Petersburg, chained to ceremony and frost. You send each other letters like oxygen, carried by couriers who know the importance of speed and secrecy. When one of his letters goes missing, you write back in fury. If I do not hear from you, I cease to exist, he replies. Then I will write until the end of the world. Still, the court gossips. They always do. They whisper that your lovers are young, that your appetites are unnatural, that the Empress of Russia cannot sleep without company. You ignore them at first. Then you learn to weaponize it. You begin choosing your lovers not just for affection, but for utility courtiers who can be trusted, guards who can keep secrets, ministers who can be persuaded more easily in your chambers than in council. It's not cruelty, it's calculus. You once wrote to a friend, "A great wind must have a few storms to keep it moving. Let them think what they want. You decide. Let them mistake intimacy for weakness." You know the truth that every embrace is also an act of survival. Still, even a goddess feels the cold when the candles go out. Some nights, you walk through the palace barefoot again, tracing your own reflection in the glass of darkened windows. The portraits stare down at you, Orlov's broad shoulders, Poniatowski's romantic eyes, Potemkin's unruly grin. Each man loved a different version of you. None loved the whole. You think of Voltaire's words. Love is a canvas, furnished by nature and embroidered by imagination. You sigh, and torn by reality. Years pass. Orlov fades into obscurity. Poniatowski loses his crown. Potemkin dies far from you, in a field under an empty sky. You receive the news in autumn, when the palace gardens are already bare. For a moment, you can't breathe. Then, quietly, you dismiss your attendants and sit alone by the fire. You hold one of his letters, the edges singed from years of rereading and whisper. You kept your word. You wrote until the end. Outside, the snow begins to fall again, heavy and endless. Inside, the flames flicker like memories you can't quite let go. You realize then that power and love share the same curse. Both demand everything, and both leave you alone in the end. So you pour yourself a glass of wine, lift it toward the empty chair across from you, and murmur softly, "To my lovers and to my lies, may they rest in peace, and may I never." Then you drink, and the Empire, faithful as ever, drinks with you. The mirror of power. You begin to see your reflection not as a woman, but as an empire with eyes and will. You wake before dawn, as you always do now. Not from duty, from habit. The palace is quiet, except for the faint scrape of servants' slippers against marble. The whisper of fire being coaxed to life. You sit by the window, robe drawn close, staring out at the frozen Neva. The river doesn't flow this time of year. It holds its breath, like the Empire itself waiting for your command. You used to see yourself as a woman who happened to rule. Now, the boundaries blur. Somewhere along the way, Catherine became Russia, or maybe Russia became Catherine. The line between person and nation dissolves like sugar in tea. You sign decrees, grant titles, command wars, all with the same hand that once wrote love letters. You no longer ask, "What do I want?" but rather, "What must Russia become?" And when you catch your reflection in the mirror, you no longer recognize the face that asks it. Historians still argue whether power changed you or merely revealed what was always waiting beneath your politeness. They describe you as calculated, imperial, ruthless. They forget that ruthlessness is simply what mercy looks like when it learns to survive. You've ruled for over a decade now, and the world has learned to fear your calm. Ambassadors bow too deeply. Courtiers laugh too quickly. They call you Mother of the Nation in public and the Northern Sphinx in private. Both names are accurate. You sit through council meetings with the stillness of stone, letting men argue themselves into exhaustion before you speak a single word, and when you do, the debate ends. You know how to weaponize silence. You know that the true mark of power isn't volume, it's gravity. There's a story from this period that diplomats still tell. A visiting envoy from France, young, arrogant, powdered with perfume and ambition, arrives expecting to charm you. He bows, smiles, delivers a flowery speech about the shared ideals of enlightenment between your majesties. You listen, expression unreadable. When he finishes, you simply say, "Russia is not enlightened. Russia is awake." He laughs awkwardly. You don't. The meeting ends 10 minutes later. The next morning, his entire delegation leaves the country. Your portraits begin to change. No more the soft curls and pastoral gowns of your youth. Now painters capture you as a goddess of empire. Laurel wreaths, scepters, the map of Russia unfurled beneath your hand. You study those portraits sometimes and think, is this who I've become or what they needed me to be? You remember that first day after your coup, the soldiers kneeling, the fog, the fragile crown. You were terrified then. Now, terror is something you command. You've learned to read power like a language. Who speaks it, who fakes it, who fears it. You've also learned that everyone from the humblest clerk to the grandest prince wants something from you. Some want mercy, others, money. A few, your approval. None want the truth, so you keep it to yourself. Potemkin's death leaves a hollow no policy can fill. You channel your grief into empire building literally. New cities rise in Crimea. New fleets cut through black seas. You extend your dominion eastward until the cartographers run out of paper. When they bring you maps showing new borders, you trace your finger along the inked edges. We are vast, you whisper, but not yet enough. You order surveys of Siberia, colonization of Alaska, plans for schools and ports and factories. The ministers nod, scribbling furiously, though most of them barely understand what you're describing. You do. You see it clearly, a web of progress stretching across continents. Your will carried by ships and snow. But the mirror doesn't lie. At night, when the courtiers sleep and the palace candles gutter low, you catch sight of yourself reflected in the darkened glass. For a moment, you think it's another figure, tall, regal, still until it moves when you do. You approach. The reflection seems older, colder, carved from the same marble as your statues. The crown glints faintly in the candlelight, though you're not wearing it. You whisper, "Who are you?" The reflection doesn't answer, but its eyes, your eyes, seem to say, "You are what you created." You look down at your hands, still ink-stained from the day's decrees, and realize they tremble slightly, not from fear, from fatigue, from holding an empire too long without rest. Outside, the snow begins again, fine, relentless, perfect. You open the window and let the flakes drift onto your palm. For a moment, you imagine each one as a soul under your rule, brief, delicate, indistinguishable, countless. Then they melt against your skin. You close the window and return to your desk, where a dozen letters await your signature. Decrees, petitions, death warrants, treaties. You sign them all. At the bottom of each document, in looping ink, one word repeats, Ekaterina, and somewhere between ink and eternity, you start to forget which one is real, the woman or the name. Sometimes, you visit your portrait gallery at night, walking past the rows of faces, generals, nobles, poets, lovers, traitors, all immortalized by your order. You pause before your own portrait and study it the way an artist examines her own work for flaws. The painter captured you perfectly, serene, untouchable, divine. You hate it because it's not you anymore. It's Russia, and Russia, you're starting to realize, is hungrier than you ever were. The rebellion that burned the fields' peasants rise. The steppe smolders, and mercy becomes a currency you cannot afford. The first rumors reach you in summer, whispers carried on hot winds from the Volga. At first, it sounds like nonsense. A few discontented peasants, a deserter claiming to be your dead husband returned from the grave. Russia is full of ghosts like that. You tell your ministers to handle it quietly, but the reports keep coming. Villages burned, landlords murdered, the names spreading like infection. Pugachev, Emelian Pugachev, a Cossack, rough, illiterate, charismatic in the way disasters often are. He claims to be Peter III, the husband you supposedly murdered. He promises freedom to the serfs, revenge against the nobles, and mercy from the real Tsar. Historians still argue whether you underestimated him or whether no one could have foreseen what he'd unleash. Either way, you soon learn. Nothing spreads faster than hope among the hungry. By autumn, the rebellion swells into a storm. Tens of thousands of peasants join him, men with pitchforks and prayers, women with scythes and rage. They march under banners of the Orthodox cross and vengeance. The countryside burns from Kazan to the Urals. You read the reports late at night. Eyes scanning lists of villages destroyed, garrisons overrun, priests hanged. The handwriting of your generals grows more frantic with each dispatch. For the first time in years, the empire feels fragile like glass, flexing under pressure. You remember the mirror from your chamber, the reflection that didn't smile. You almost hear it whisper. You built order on bones. Did you think they wouldn't rise? You summon your council. Old men in powdered wigs and silk coats stand trembling before you. What does this Pugachev want? You ask. Your throne, one replies. You smile thinly. Then he will find it defended. You order full mobilization. Cossack against Cossack, brother against brother. You dispatch Potemkin's successors, men trained in your doctrine of efficiency and ruthlessness. War returns to Russia, not from outside, but from within. In the provinces, entire towns vanish overnight. Peasants burn noble estates and call it justice. You issue proclamations of clemency for those who surrender, and death for those who don't. The line between rebellion and revenge blurs into smoke. Your soldiers fight through forests and frozen plains, killing and dying for names no one will remember. The reports come daily, thicker than snow. You stop opening them all, but one night, you do. The handwriting is shaky, the message brief, Kazan lost. Churches aflame, survivors crucified on the road. You read it twice, then fold it neatly and set it beside your wine glass. No tears, no anger, just the faint ache of inevitability. Months pass. The rebellion grows, peaks, falters. Pugachev, betrayed by his own men, is captured and brought to Moscow in chains. The city gathers to watch his execution, the spectacle of a false Tsar, dying for the amusement of a real one. You don't attend. You don't need to. Later, they bring you his final words, spoken before the blade fell. Tell the Empress, I forgive her. You read them in silence, then burn the paper. Historians debate whether the Pugachev rebellion changed you. Some say it hardened your heart. Others claim it merely confirmed what you already knew, that mercy without control is suicide. Afterward, your reforms grow colder, sharper. You tighten the nobility's grip over the serfs to prevent another uprising. You censor more books, watch the church more closely, and trust fewer men. When foreign ambassadors ask about your philosophy now, you smile and quote Montesquieu less and Machiavelli more. Russia, you tell them, is not a country that can be governed with kindness. But in private, you're haunted by the faces. Not of generals or traitors of peasants, mothers clutching children, men barefoot in snow, old women praying before icons as soldiers torch their homes. You see them when you close your eyes. You imagine them whispering to one another in the dark. She promised light. One night, you wander the halls, unable to sleep. The palace feels too large, too empty. The marble under your feet might as well be ice. You stop before a window. Far below, in the city, fires burn in hearths, and forges tiny, harmless ones this time. The rebellion is over. Russia is quiet again. But peace now feels like a truce between exhaustion and grief. You rest your hand on the glass, palm against the frost, and murmur, if I were born a peasant, I would have followed him too. In the morning, you host a grand reception to celebrate the victory. Foreign diplomats toast your strength. The orchestra plays triumphal marches. You raise your glass, smiling, radiant as ever. No one sees the way your hand trembles slightly, because you understand something that no one at that table will ever admit, that an empire can survive rebellion, but not self-deception. You've learned what every monarch eventually learns, that power is not measured by love or even by fear. It's measured by how much loss you can bear without flinching. That night, you order the palace mirrors covered in black cloth. The servants ask why. You tell them, because reflections are dangerous when the eyes are tired. And as the candles die one by one, the woman who once wrote letters to philosophers now sits alone in darkness, realizing that wisdom means nothing when the world only listens to strength. Outside, winter presses its hand against the windows. The empire sleeps, scarred, obedient, and awake. Palaces of gold, hearts of dust. The wealth of Russia dazzles Europe. But inside your halls, silence echoes louder than music. Street Petersburg gleams like a fever dream. The city you inherited from Peter the Great has grown into something monstrous and magnificent. A symphony of marble, mirrors, and ambition. Carriages roll down icy boulevards lined with lamplight. Nobles glide through gilded halls wearing smiles like masks. And your own reflection multiplies endlessly in the polished glass of your empire. From Paris to Vienna, they whisper your name with awe. Catherine the Great, the enlightened Empress, the builder of cities, the conqueror of time. And yet, when you walk the Winter Palace at midnight, your footsteps echo as if through a tomb. The walls glitter, but the air feels heavy. The chandeliers drip crystal tears. Every inch of the palace hums with power and emptiness. You host banquets that make Europe blush. Fountains of wine, orchestras that play until dawn, masked balls where nobles waltz beneath ceilings painted with gods. Diplomats applaud, poets faint, and the gossip columns of Paris practically combust. Historians still argue whether you built such excess out of pride or loneliness. Maybe both. You understand that spectacle is cheaper than revolution. As long as they're dazzled, they won't ask questions. But amid the music and laughter, you sometimes catch glimpses of your own ghosts. The soldiers who died for your empire, the peasants who starved for your projects, the lovers who promised forever and meant for now. Their faces flicker in candlelight, vanishing before you can name them. One evening, the French ambassador leans close during dinner. "Your Majesty," he purrs. "Surely even an empress must find all this splendor tiresome." You smile, cool as glass. "Only when it reminds me what it costs." He laughs, thinking it a joke. It isn't, because by now, you know the price of everything. Love, loyalty, silence. You've paid in full, and always in solitude. You walk through your art galleries at night, candle in hand, the flame trembling in drafts. The Hermitage has grown enormous, a sanctuary for the masterpieces you've rescued from Europe's chaos. You pause before a Rembrandt, his painted light falling on the face of a weary saint. You trace the brushstrokes with your eyes, whispering, "You understood what power hides." Nearby hangs a portrait of yourself, stern, divine, untouchable. You tilt your head, studying the artist's flattery. "You lied beautifully," you murmur. A servant enters, bowing low. "Majesty, do you wish for music?" "No," you say softly. "Let the silence play tonight." Outside, the empire expands. Crimea, the Black Sea, the Caucasus, names that now belong to your map. You host celebrations for each conquest, banquets dripping with gold and gilt. At one, a foreign envoy marvels at your might. "You've made Russia the envy of the world," he says. You sip your wine and answer, "Envy is easier to manage than love." The courtiers laugh, as they always do, unsure whether you mean it. You do. Letters from across Europe flood your desk. Philosophers still praise you, though the tone has changed. France is restless. Its own people whisper of liberty, equality, and heads without crowns. You read these letters with a strange sense of déjà vu. So this is how it starts. You think a spark in the dark. You recognize it because you once lit one yourself. You write to your ministers. Keep the French newspapers out of Russia. You tell your advisors to double the watch on the printing presses, and you feel the first chill of irony. The Empress who loved enlightenment, now guarding against its light. When a friend teases you about it, you shrug. "Candles are lovely," you reply, until they start fires. Your body begins to betray you, knees aching, hands trembling when you write. You mask it with thicker gloves, stronger posture, sharper words. But at night, when the palace sleeps, you soak your hands in warm water and whisper to your reflection, "Not yet." You've seen too many monarchs die badly in revolt, in disgrace, in the dark. You intend to die surrounded by art, music, and control. If God wishes otherwise, he'll have to negotiate. Sometimes, when the pain grows too sharp, you wander the lesser-used halls, the ones still smelling faintly of dust and candle soot. You pass portraits of long-dead courtiers, lovers, rivals. You murmur their names like incantations. Orlov, Poniatowski, Potemkin. Did I ever belong to any of you? You wonder aloud. Or only to Russia? The portraits, wisely, do not answer. A strange melancholy begins to haunt your nights. You still work until dawn, signing decrees, reading reports, orchestrating reforms like symphonies. But every triumph feels quieter. One evening, a court musician plays an old melody on the violin. Slow, tender, imperfect. You recognize it from your youth. A folk tune you once hummed as Sophie, the girl who dreamed of crowns. You ask him to play it again and again. By the third time, your hands tremble. The courtiers pretend not to see the tears gathering at the corners of your eyes. When the music ends, you whisper, "Strange. I thought I'd forgotten that song." He bows. "It remembered you, Majesty." Later, as you walk alone through the mirrored corridors, your reflection stretches endlessly in both directions. Catherine multiplied into infinity. Each version older, wiser, lonelier. You stop, raise a candle, and meet your own gaze. "Palaces of gold," you whisper. "Hearts of dust." The flame wavers. The reflections flicker. And for the first time, you see what they've all been trying to tell you. That even mirrors can grow tired of pretending they're windows. The mother of the nation, you plan dynasties, rewrite laws, and measure immortality in marble and ink. You're 60 now, though you never say the number aloud. Numbers are for accountants, not empresses. The mirror is kind only by candlelight, and even then, it tells you what you already know. The face that once conquered Russia with charm now rules it with sheer will. Still, you rise before dawn as always. Habit is a crown that never slips. You wrap yourself in velvet, summon your secretaries, and begin the day's work. Decrees, appointments, letters, the endless machinery of empire. The courtiers call you tireless. You know the truth. You're afraid to stop. Because stopping means thinking. And thinking means remembering. Your son, Paul, now a man grown, paces like an uninvited shadow at the edge of your legacy. You've given him everything. Tutors, palaces, titles, but not power. You can't. He is impulsive, moody, obsessed with military drills and petty slights. You see too much of Peter in him. When he argues that the throne is his by right, you answer coolly, "Then perhaps you should earn it." Historians will later call your relationship tragic, but tragedy requires love. Yours is an equation. You rule. He resents. Still, you plan dynasties with the precision of a mathematician. You groom his sons, your grandsons, as heirs instead. You see in them a chance to skip a generation of mistakes. "Russia," you murmur once, holding the youngest child, "will belong to those who can love her without fear." The baby sneezes. You take it as agreement. Beyond family, your empire still demands expansion outward, always outward. You oversee colonization in Crimea, administration in the Caucasus, and maps so vast that cartographers beg for rest. You give none. When an advisor asks if you intend to rule the world, you answer, "Only the parts that interest me." You rewrite the laws again, streamline, simplify, solidify. You build academies, libraries, orphanages. You reform hospitals, improve sanitation, order new theaters. To the public, you are Matt Rossii, Mother of Russia. To your enemies, a benevolent tyrant with perfect posture. Historians still argue which one is closer to the truth. Each decree feels like an act of architecture. You imagine the empire as a cathedral made of ink and intent. Each word a brick, each signature a cornerstone. You no longer build for the present, you build for memory. At night, you reread your old correspondence, Voltaire's letters yellowed with time, Potemkin's notes faded to whispers. You keep them locked in a chest beside your desk, the closest thing to a diary you've ever allowed yourself. Sometimes, you unfold one and read it aloud, just to hear another voice in the room. But even as you craft your immortality, the world beyond your windows begins to crumble. France has torn itself apart in revolution, kings guillotined, philosophers hunted, the very Enlightenment you once worshipped devouring its creators. You read the news with equal parts fascination and dread. Liberty, equality, fraternity, you mutter. Such fine words until they come with knives. You tighten censorship again, wary of sparks. You tell your ministers, ideas are like fire. They can warm or they can consume. Keep the hearth tended, but lock the matches away. Still, the irony isn't lost on you. The woman who once wrote manifestos of freedom now edits them into obedience. Yet in quieter moments, you still dream. You still imagine Russia as the nation of your youth, strong, modern, elegant. You imagine universities filled with scholars debating justice instead of superstition. You imagine peasants learning to read their own names. You imagine being remembered not for conquest or scandal, but for reason. And then you smile because you know history doesn't remember reason. It remembers spectacle. So you give it one. You commission new palaces, Tsarskoye, Selo, Pavlovsk, Potemkin's ghost reborn in architecture. You order marble busts of philosophers, poets, even yourself, scattered across the empire. You fund painters to immortalize your likeness until your image becomes as ubiquitous as sunlight. At your grand unveiling of the Bronze Horseman, Peter the Great, cast in bronze, forever riding forward, you stand in the crowd unseen, wrapped in furs. The wind off the Neva bites your cheeks. You stare up at Peter's outstretched hand, pointing toward eternity and whisper, "You built the empire. I made it live." The statue doesn't reply. Bronze doesn't speak, it endures. And that, you think, is the closest thing to immortality. Sometimes, at dusk, you sit in your study and listen to the sounds of your empire. The distant creak of ships, the faint toll of church bells, the rhythmic scratch of quills in offices across the city. Each sound, a pulse of a living thing you've shaped. You think of the word mother. It's flattering, but inaccurate. Mothers nurture what already exists. You created what never was, and in the silence that follows, you admit something only to yourself. You never ruled Russia. You became it. The distinction, at this point, is meaningless. The mask of enlightenment. You speak of freedom while chaining millions. Historians still argue whether it was hypocrisy or survival. There's a kind of cruelty in being worshipped for the thing you cannot give. Every pamphlet, every portrait, every speech praises you as Catherine the Enlightened, the Empress who brought civilization to the frozen north, who read philosophy and corresponded with genius, who dressed tyranny in silk and reason. But in your heart, you know the contradiction you've built your throne upon. Russia cannot be enlightened and obedient at the same time. And obedience, as you've learned, is the only thing that keeps empires breathing. It begins quietly. You're reviewing a report from the southern provinces when you notice the word serfdom written over and over again, like a curse you've stopped trying to lift. You pause, tapping the quill against your lip. How strange, you think, that philosophers in Paris call you the liberator of minds. And yet, more than 20 million souls remain bound to the land like ghosts in chains. Historians will spend centuries debating whether you ever intended to free them. You'll never give them a clear answer. The truth is simpler and more tragic. You wanted to, you couldn't. You once dreamed of reform, imagined peasants learning to read, to reason, to rise. But the moment you tried, the nobility howled, the church thundered, the soldiers muttered. You realized that to free the serfs would mean to lose the throne. So you made peace with contradiction. You built libraries beside prisons, orphanages beside estates worked by slaves, and called it balance. You told yourself it was temporary. You told yourself enlightenment must happen slowly, like thaw after winter. But winters in Russia are long, and you have grown tired of waiting for spring. Still, you perform the role beautifully. You attend salons, dressed in pale silk, embroidered with laurels and symbols of justice. You host debates about liberty, while guards stand outside the doors. You quote Montesquieu, smile at ambassadors, and toast to the rights of man, careful never to include the women or peasants who make your empire possible. You've become fluent in irony. One evening, a young nobleman dares to challenge you at dinner. "Majesty," he says, voice trembling, "how can an empire be enlightened when half its people live in chains?" The room freezes. Forks pause midair. You sip your wine. "It can't," you say finally. "But it can try." He exhales in relief. In confusion, you're not sure. The conversation shifts to safer topics. Later, that same nobleman is quietly reassigned to a distant province. Mercy, you've learned, is often best practiced from a distance. You write again to Diderot, long after Voltaire's death. You tell him that philosophers dream of perfect worlds because they never have to govern imperfect people. You ask him, would Rousseau survive a winter in Moscow? He doesn't reply. Perhaps he's too polite. Or perhaps he knows the question wasn't really meant for him. You turn back to your papers, to the endless bureaucratic tide. Taxes, reforms, trade agreements, war budgets. Each sheet a heartbeat in the body of your empire. It's easier to drown in work than in conscience. The older you grow, the more masks you collect. There's Catherine the Builder, who erects palaces, ports, and roads. Catherine the Philosopher, who writes essays on justice and reason. Catherine the Mother, who kisses infants in front of cheering crowds. And then there's the one no one sees, Catherine the Survivor. The woman who knows that ideals are luxuries, and that power, once tasted, is harder to give up than breath itself. You keep her locked away, deep beneath the layers of silk and ceremony, where even mirrors can't find her. But sometimes, she escapes, usually in the quiet hours before dawn, when your pen stops moving and your reflection stares back too long. One such night, you dream of a field, endless, golden, rippling in the wind. Peasants kneel, planting seed after seed. You walk among them, smiling, until you realize they're not sowing grain, but chains. When you wake, your pulse is pounding, and for the first time in years, your eyes sting with something dangerously close to shame. You rise, pace the room, whisper to the portraits of long-dead philosophers. You wanted me to be a torch, but the world only lets me be a candle. Outside, the wind howls. The candles flicker. The empire sleeps on. By daylight, you recover your calm. You hold court, approve petitions, sign decrees. You make a show of charity, a school here, a hospital there. You even free a few thousand serfs from an especially cruel noble, an act that earns you applause from Europe and resentment from everyone else. Your advisors tell you the people love you. You nod, knowing love is just another kind of silence. The mask fits more easily now. You tell yourself it isn't hypocrisy. It's adaptation, survival, duty. And when the voices of doubt whisper from the corners of your conscience, you answer them in the only language power understands. Let history judge me. I will not live long enough to care. That night, you pass by the window overlooking the Neva, its frozen surface gleaming in moonlight. You touch the glass, the cold biting your fingertips, and murmur. Freedom and order, perhaps God meant for only one to exist. And then, as if in answer, A gust of wind snuffs the nearest candle out. The room goes dark. For a moment, you see your reflection in the window, a faint outline crowned in shadow. The enlightened Empress, the mask that no longer needs a face. The ghost of Peter, your dead husband, haunts every decision. A reminder that crowns are won, not inherited. He should have vanished long ago, dissolved into history, into rumor, into the polite silence of official memory. But he doesn't. Peter still lingers, like a draft under a closed door. You hear him in the whispers of courtiers when they think you're out of earshot. You see him in the eyes of your son, in the way Paul stands a little too stiff, salutes a little too often, clings to rules you never made. Even the church won't bury the ghost properly. It prefers its martyrs alive or conveniently dead, not disputed. Peter III, the husband who drank, who played soldier with dogs, who you overthrew in a fog-thick dawn. The man the rebels claimed to see years later, risen from the grave and promising freedom. The man whose death, however it happened, made your life possible. Historians still argue whether you ordered it. They'll argue forever. You never answered then, and you never will. Because some truths are too expensive for even an empress to afford. You keep his portrait locked away in a small cabinet near your study, a habit no one knows about. It's a strange thing to hide the face of the man whose death defined your destiny. He looks absurd, even in paint-awkward jaw, two bright eyes, that silly Prussian uniform he adored. Yet, when you glance at it, a chill crawls up your neck. You whisper, "You were never meant for the crown. I only wore it better." But sometimes, in sleepless hours, you wonder, was it justice or ambition? Did you save Russia or just yourself? And always, the silence answers back. Your son, Paul, keeps Peter's ghost alive more than anyone else. He idolizes the father he never knew, despises the mother who kept him alive. His letters drip with resentment disguised as duty. He accuses you of usurpation, of murder, of playing God. You write back with perfect restraint. "You are free to think what you like, my son, but remember, crowns are heavy. I only wear what I can carry." He doesn't reply. When you hear he's commissioned medals bearing Peter's face, you order them melted down quietly. You replace them with coins bearing your own image, not out of vanity, but necessity. Memory is a weapon, and you can't let his version of history sharpen it. Still, the past has a way of knocking twice. One winter evening, as you walk through the corridors of the Winter Palace, a guard bursts in pale, breathless. "Majesty, forgive me," he stammers. "But there are rumors in the city again, of Peter." You almost laugh. "Again?" "Yes, Majesty. They say he lives on the steppe, gathering men. They call him the true Tsar." You sip your tea unbothered. Then let the true Tsar enjoy the cold. But later, when you're alone, you stare into the fireplace and watch the flames twist into shapes, faces, crowns, fragments of memory. And for a heartbeat, you think you see him. The childish grin, the pale eyes, the hands that once reached for you in clumsy affection before turning to cruelty. "Rest," you whisper. "You've served your purpose." The fire crackles, flares, then collapses into ash. But ghosts are stubborn things. They live not in mirrors, but in minds, in guilt, in inheritance. You catch yourself thinking like him sometimes, barking orders, praising Prussian efficiency, even humming the little military tune he used to annoy you with. You stop, startled, as though someone else had spoken. It's then you realize you've become the shadow of the man you erased. He ruled for months, you for decades. Yet his failure gave your reign its shape, his death its meaning. Without Peter, there would be no Catherine. Without the ghost, perhaps no greatness. You hate the symmetry of it. You hate that power and guilt share the same root. Years later, you find yourself standing in the very room where you once planned his overthrow. The same table, the same window. The air feels charged with invisible echoes. You trace your fingers along the grain of the wood and say quietly, "If it were to happen again, I'd do it the same." You pose, then softly. "But I'd close his eyes myself." At night, the dreams return. You walk through endless corridors of marble. At each turn stands a statue of Peter. Not the fool you remember, but regal, idealized, perfect. He watches you with an expression you can't read. Pity, perhaps. When you finally reach the end of the corridor, you find a mirror instead of a door. You lean closer and see, not yourself, but him, smiling faintly. You wake, gasping, heart hammering. You sit up, whisper into the darkness. "You died. I lived. That's all." But the darkness whispers back, "Yes, and that's everything." The next morning, your ministers find you unusually quiet during council. They mistake it for illness. It's something else. Reflection. You think of all you've built, the schools, the cities, the laws. You think of the philosophers who praised you, the armies who obeyed you, the lovers who swore devotion. And beneath it all, the one act that made it possible, a death no one dares to mention. You straighten your spine, sign another decree, and say aloud to no one in particular, "Russia will not be haunted." But even as you speak, you know the truth it already is. That night, the Neva freezes solid, trapping ships in glittering stillness. You stand at the window, watching the moonlight on the ice, and feel his presence again. Faint but undeniable, not a ghost of flesh, but of consequence. Peter, the first crown you took, the last memory you'll never escape. You raise your glass to the frozen river and say softly, "To the dead who make the living possible." The wind doesn't answer. But somewhere, deep within the palace walls, a door creaks open and closes by itself. The fall of the curtain age creeps through your veins. Your courtiers rehearse loyalty while waiting for your silence. Morning comes slower now. You feel it before you see it. That sluggish ache in your hands when the servants draw back the curtains. That pause before you rise. The faint resistance in your knees that no crown can command. The Empire wakes on time. You do not. You are 70. The courtiers don't say it aloud, but the air in the palace carries a kind of watchful politeness, the sort reserved for someone powerful and mortal. They bow as deeply as ever, laugh at your jokes as quickly as ever, but in their eyes, you see it, calculation. They're already rehearsing the future without you in it, and you, who have spent your life mastering masks, recognize theirs immediately. You keep busy. You always have. Each morning you summon ministers, review reports, sign decrees. The same empire that once roared under your hand now purrs, tamed, though you can still hear the growl beneath. You know better than anyone that Russia never truly sleeps, it waits. Paul sends you letters, each one dripping with barely concealed resentment. He calls you mother in ink, usurper in his prayers. You no longer bother to respond. The last time you saw him, his posture was a sermon of defiance. You could have dismissed him, exiled him, undone him, but you didn't. Perhaps pity stayed your hand, perhaps fatigue. Historians will wonder why you never disinherited him outright. The truth is cruelly simple. You wanted to see whether your creation, this great, impossible machine called Russia, could survive without you. You hold court as you always have, though the rituals now feel like echoes. The music plays, the nobles twirl, and your laughter, once magnetic, now feels like an old song played too often. Your newest favorite, a gentle young man named Zubov, reads poetry to you in the evenings. His voice is soft, eager to please. You smile, half listening, More mother than lover now. When he finishes, he bows and asks, "Did it move you, Majesty?" "Yes," you reply. "It reminded me that everything beautiful eventually dies." He laughs, unsure if he should. You let him wonder. Outside your window, the Empire thrives, or pretends to. Trade flows, armies march, diplomats write flattery in foreign tongues. But the foundation trembles in places you can't quite reach anymore. The peasants still toil. The nobles still scheme. The priests still bless what they don't understand. You used to control it all with a glance. Now, it feels like watching your reflection ripple in water, recognizable but fading. You look at your hands, the veins like rivers on an old map. These hands once signed revolutions, built cities, destroyed lovers, and rewrote destiny. Now they shake when you hold a cup of tea. You murmur half to yourself, "So this is how empires end quietly." One evening, you host a small dinner, not the grand feasts of your youth. Just a table of ministers and confidants. You tell stories, you laugh, and for a few hours, it feels like the old days. But as the plates are cleared, you catch a glimpse of your reflection in the silver tray, tired eyes, lips pale, a face sculpted by power and years. You lift a hand to touch it, almost surprised it's still yours. When the others leave, you remain at the table. The candles gutter low. The air tastes faintly of wax and nostalgia. You think of Peter, of Orlov, of Potemkin, of Voltaire, who once called you immortal. You smile at the absurdity. Even immortality, it seems, has an expiration date. The doctors have grown cautious with their words. They speak of rest and conservation of strength. You dismiss them with a wave. "I'll rest when I'm dead," you tell them. They don't laugh. You spend more time in your study now, surrounded by books that once felt like companions and now feel like eulogies. You reread your nakaz, the laws you wrote in your youth, full of idealism and impossible hope. The ink has faded. You trace the words with your finger, whispering, "We meant well." You used to believe reason could civilize chaos. Now you know the opposite. Chaos civilizes reason by force. Sometimes, at night, you hear footsteps in the corridor. Not the soft shuffle of servants, but a rhythm you recognize. Potemkin's stride, Peter's impatience, your own. You tell yourself it's the wind, the wood settling, your imagination. But deep down, you know, the ghosts are gathering. They've been patient. Autumn arrives. You travel to Tsarskoye Selo, your favorite palace, the one that smells of cedar and memory. You ride through the gardens in a small carriage, wrapped in furs, the trees blazing gold around you. The driver says nothing. The horses move slow, their breath clouds of steam. You think of that girl from Anhalt Zerp's Sophie, the foreign princess who came to Russia with nothing but ambition and a good education. You whisper, "You did well, little one." The wind carries the words away. Back in your chambers, you ask for paper. Your hand trembles as you write the opening of a new decree. One final reform. One final act of control. The pen scratches, the ink blots, the candle flickers. You stop, realizing you can't quite remember what you meant to say. For the first time in your life, your will hesitates. You lean back, staring at the ceiling, the painted clouds and cherubs frozen in eternal daylight. You think, "I have lived in gold so long I've forgotten the color of the sky." And then, softly, you laugh. Because even now, even on the edge of death, you understand what most rulers never do. That power is not about ruling the world. It's about not letting it rule you. The palace grows quieter each day. The servants move like ghosts. Courtiers linger outside your door, waiting not for your orders, but for the sound of your absence. You sense it. You always have. But you don't fear it. You've spent a lifetime preparing for this curtain to fall, and you intend to bow before it does. The Empress, who died alone, surrounded by splendor and suspicion, you face the one rival you cannot conquer. Time. It happens on an ordinary morning, the kind you've lived 1,000 times before. The sun pushes pale light through frosted windows. Servants whisper in the hallway. Papers wait on your desk like obedient soldiers. You rise, slower than usual, the air thick and sweet, with the smell of ink and candle wax. There are reports to sign, petitions to approve, an empire to steer, but the pen feels heavier than it should. You set it down, and then, for the first time in your reign, you allow yourself a pause. Nah diplomacy, nah decrees, nah pretending, just silence. The physicians call it exhaustion. You call it inevitability. They bustle around you frightened, reverent, useless muttering words like stroke and apoplexy, terrified of what it means to fail you. You dismiss them with a faint smile. You've been commanding men all your life. This is no different. Don't look so grave, you whisper. I've survived worse mornings. They try to lift you from the floor, but the strength in your body has already begun to fade. Like the echo of a bell struck once too long ago, you spend your final hours half-conscious, drifting in and out of dreams. The line between memory and imagination softens, and the palace walls melt into scenes from your life. You're a child again, tracing the spines of forbidden books, a bride shivering in a foreign church, a conspirator in the fog, clutching destiny by its throat, an empress crowned beneath thunder. Each vision dissolves into the next, and through it all, one thought repeats simple, almost tender. I was never meant to last, only to leave something that does. The courtiers gather outside your room, faces arranged in solemn rehearsals of grief. Some weep, some whisper. Most wait not for your death, but for their future to begin. Paul is among them, pacing, impatient, terrified. You imagine him on the other side of the door, fidgeting, cursing, already tasting the power he's wanted his entire life. You almost pity him, almost. He'll inherit the crown, but not the steadiness, the vision, the loneliness it demands. You hope he learns quickly, though you suspect he won't. Perhaps that's how history renews itself through repetition disguised as progress. The priest leans close, murmuring prayers. You try to follow, but his words blur into sound, not Latin, not Russian, just music fading at the edges of your mind. For a moment, the candles around your bed seem to brighten. You think you see faces in the light. Peter, Orlov, Potemkin, Voltaire, watching, waiting. Don't look so smug, you whisper to them. I outlived you all. The room flickers. The air grows soft. Somewhere outside, a bell tolls once, twice, 3 times, and you realize with faint amusement that it's not for prayer. It's for you. Your last clear thought isn't of thrones or wars or lovers. It's of a carriage rolling through snow, the first journey you ever took to Russia. The endless white stretching before you, the sound of wheels biting through frost. You remember thinking then that destiny was a road without end. Now you know it always led here. You smile. Or maybe you only imagine that you do. And just before the light goes out, you whisper to the silence, I hope Russia forgives me for loving her too much. They'll find you lying on the floor beside your writing desk, not regal, not composed, just human. In the days to come, the city will mourn. Bells will toll, soldiers will march, poets will write odes no one means. They'll bury you in Peter and Paul Cathedral beside the husband you dethroned. A symmetry, both cruel and perfect. Paul will reign, briefly, brutally, The empire will continue, because empires always do. And yet, long after his laws crumble and his portraits fade, your name will remain carved in marble, whispered in classrooms, studied in languages you never spoke. They'll remember the paradox, the philosopher queen who censored books, the liberator who bound millions, the woman who built an empire yet died alone. Centuries from now, tourists will walk through your palaces, their footsteps echoing on the same marble floors where you once plotted, danced, and dreamed. They'll stare at your portraits, your crown, your ink-stained letters, and wonder what it felt like to hold the world together with bare hands. And if they listen closely, very closely, they might hear a voice carried faintly through the corridors. I am still here. The candles burn down to stubs. The mirrors are draped in black. Outside, the Neva flows on slow, eternal, indifferent, carrying your reflection toward history. You've conquered everything except time, and in that defeat, you finally find peace. The palace grows quiet. The empire exhales. Imagine the candles flickering in vast halls where gold meets shadow, the kind of silence that hums rather than sleeps. The snow outside softens the city's heartbeat, and somewhere in the endless night, a single window still glows your window, perhaps, or the echo of it. You picture her there, the girl who became an empress, then a myth sitting by the fire, her reflection caught in glass, her thoughts drifting between history and heaven. She isn't grand now. She isn't terrible. She's just tired. You hear the faint scratch of her quill, the sound of someone trying to outright mortality. Every ruler dreams of that, and none succeed. But Catherine came close. So tonight, as the world outside your own window grows still, think of her not as marble or crown, but as something closer. A human being who learned that greatness is simply loneliness made useful. Maybe she was cruel, maybe brilliant, maybe both. But she was alive, vividly, dangerously alive, and she refused to apologize for it. Let the sound of her story fade into the hush of the room around you. Let her ambition, her laughter, her contradictions drift upward like smoke. And as the last of her candlelight flickers out, remember this. The world she ruled is gone. But her question remains, what will you build before the night takes you to? Close your eyes. Breathe. The empire is quiet now. The snow is falling. Sweet dreams.